This seems nowhere clearer than in a recent broadcast by Nick Cannon. Do you remember Nick Cannon? Nick Cannon is an actor. He's a musician, sort of. He's been a pop culture figure for decades at this point. Nick Cannon decided to broadcast yesterday, not on even his radical left ideology, you know, like when we think of Marxism or something, Maoism, something like that. He broadcast on a radical left racial ideology. The mirror image of the Nazi, KKK, Ku Klux Klan, you know, the thing the left is always talking about. We got to get rid of racism. We need anti-racism. Well, it turns out their anti-racism so often is just the mirror image, just as bad, only directed against the other guy. Nick Cannon preached about the power of melanin.
Let's go to what it really is then. When we talk about the power of melanated people, when we talk about who we really are as guys and understanding that our melanin is so powerful and it connects us in a way that the reason why they fear black, the reason why they fear is because the lack that they have of it. So then when you see what, you know, Dr. Francis C. Welsing talked about is that fear in that
just genetic annihilation,
deficiency of when you have a person that has the lack of pigment, the lack of melanin, that they know that they will be annihilated. So therefore, however they got the power, they have the lack of compassion. That melanin comes with compassion. Melanin comes with soul. That we call it soul. We soul brothers and sisters. That's the melanin that connects us. So the people that don't have it are a little, and I'm gonna say this carefully, are a little less, and where the term actually comes from, because I'm bringing it all the way back around to Minister Farrakhan.
Okay, there we go. Now my eyes go up. This is Minister Farrakhan. Louis Farrakhan is a complete degenerate. He's a black racial identitarian. He espouses horrifically heretical views on religion, and his religion is grounded primarily in race. We've heard this kind of thing before. You remember when Nicholas Sandmann, that Covington kid who was going down to the pro-life rally with his Catholic high school, and he was just standing on the National Mall minding his own business. He had a hat that said "Make America Great Again," hat that is promoted by the President of the United States. And this group of kids was heckled by a group of black supremacists called the Hebrew Israelites. And they were screaming all sorts of terrible things at him. And then that crazy Native American dude walked up to him and started banging a drum in his face. The kid behaved very well and was destroyed in the press. And by the press, and he's won a lot of judgments against them. We've heard this sort of thing before from people we would call cultural Marxists in the academy. There was one Professor Jeffries, this was decades ago, who had a theory of the sun people and the ice people. The sun people were black people who got, all the nice warm rays of the sun, and the ice people, those were white people. They were less than, as Nick Cannon is saying. Now, I, being Sicilian, I think I get a nice little middle ground here, a little more melaninated, but this is a patently absurd theory, isn't it? And it's merely used without any basis in science or history. It is used as a way to put down a group of people on the basis of their race. We always hear about people being put down on the basis of their race if they are people of color, but what Nick Cannon is doing is putting down white people on the basis of their race. He's saying they're less than, they don't have a soul. He says that they're savages.
They had to be savages. They had to be barbaric. Because they're in these Nordic mountains. They're in these rough, torrential environments. So they're acting as animals.
Right.
So they're the ones that are actually closer to animals.
They're closer to animals. Okay, this is the kind of stuff we can expect from Nick Cannon. Now, it's one thing when you hear some wacko like Louis Farrakhan say this. It's another thing when you hear some wacko like Nick Cannon say this. But the kind of stuff that these guys are saying is not just heard from these kooky guys in the culture, or even a professor like Lionel Jeffries, who talks about the sun people and the ice people. This kind of stuff is being heard at newspapers like the New York Times, where we've seen multiple articles about abolishing whiteness, the problems of whiteness. This has now infiltrated the mainstream left, what used to be called the mainstream liberal left. Nick Cannon did get fired. I guess he had a contract with Viacom CBS, and he did get fired here. Here's the statement that Viacom-CBS sent out. Viacom-CBS condemns bigotry of any kind, and we categorically denounce all forms of anti-Semitism. We have spoken with Nick Cannon about an episode of his podcast, Cannon's Class on YouTube, which promoted hateful speech and spread anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Because part of this video is he spreads this theory, also spread by the Hebrew Israelites and other black supremacist groups, that black people, American blacks, are the true Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews of the Bible, and that the Jews, who we all know as Jews, they're like the fake Jews or something like that. What's so striking to me about this statement from Viacom-CBS, it only condemns in specific terms bigotry against Jews. But all the bigotry that we just heard in that video was against white people generally. He's talking about but that's okay. Viacom doesn't condemn that bigotry. That bigotry is perfectly fine. In fact, in many quarters of the popular culture, it's encouraged, which is why you hear these calls to abolish whiteness. You hear things like toxic whiteness. You see city governments now forcing their employees to go through mandatory re-education programs where they can learn about their terrible whiteness and how they're racist, and they've got to get rid of all of their white privilege. This video is sponsored by BlinkSale, the revolutionary invoicing software for contractors and small businesses. Spend less time billing and more time making bank with BlinkSale. Get a free trial at the link in the video description.